What if the secret to never going hungry was already sitting in a Chinese grandmother's pantry, quietly waiting for the next crisis? Across China, from the humid alleys of Guangzhou to the dry highlands of Yunnan, families have spent generations mastering one quiet art, storing food that simply refuses to die. This is not hoarding in the modern panicked sense. This is something deeper, something woven into the cultural memory of a people who survived famines, floods, and wars by understanding exactly which foods could outlast almost anything. Today we are going to walk through 20 of those foods, the ones Chinese households quietly stockpile, the ones that sit in ceramic jars, wooden boxes, and sealed containers for months or even years at a time. And by the end, you will understand why a well-stocked Chinese pantry is arguably one of the most sophisticated survival systems ever quietly developed by an ordinary culture. Let's start with something almost everyone overlooks. Number 1, doubanjiang. This is the fermented broad bean and chili paste that anchors Sichuan cooking, and it is practically immortal when stored properly. The Chinese name breaks down simply, with dao meaning beans, ban meaning mixed, and jing meaning paste, and together they describe something that has been a pantry staple in Sichuan province for centuries. The reason it lasts so long comes down to its salt content, its fermentation process, and the natural preserving power of dried chilies. A sealed jar of doubanjiang can last years without refrigeration. Open jars stored in a cool, dry spot can still remain usable for well over a year. Chinese families in Sichuan and beyond treat a good jar of doubanjiang almost like a household heirloom, replenishing it slowly and using it in everything from mapo, tofu, to braised fish. The fermentation means the beneficial microorganisms have already done the hard preservation work long before the jar ever reaches your shelf. And the next food on this list works on a completely different principle, one that might actually surprise you. Number 2, baijiu. Yes, the infamous white spirit of China. The name literally means white liquor, and it is the most consumed distilled spirit on earth by volume, though most non-Chinese people have never encountered it. Baijiu ranges in strength from around 40% alcohol up to nearly 60% in some varieties, and that alcohol content is the key to its extraordinary shelf life. A sealed bottle of quality baijiu stored in a dark, cool environment does not just last for years. It can last for decades. Some collectors and serious drinkers in China deliberately age their baijiu for 20, 30, even 50 years, and the value climbs accordingly. Bottles recovered from old homes and cellars have sometimes fetched enormous sums at auction. Beyond its drinking value, baijiu has historically served medicinal and antiseptic purposes in Chinese households, meaning it was genuinely multi-purpose in ways that made storing it doubly sensible. And while alcohol preservation makes intuitive sense, the next item on this list uses a completely different survival mechanism. Number 3, suan kai. This is Chinese fermented sour cabbage, and while it sounds similar to sauerkraut, the preparation and flavor are distinct. Suan means sour and cai means vegetable, and the combination describes a product that has been lacto-fermented in brine to the point where it becomes almost self-preserving. The lactic acid generated during fermentation creates an environment hostile to harmful bacteria, which is exactly why this preparation method developed independently in multiple cultures across cold climates long before refrigeration existed. In northeastern China, particularly in Heilongjiang and Jilin provinces, suan kai is a winter staple that households traditionally prepared in large batches before temperatures dropped. A well-sealed fermentation crock of suan kai can last through an entire winter and beyond. The sour funk deepens over time rather than degrading, and families often preferred older batches for their more complex flavor. Speaking of things that age into something extraordinary, what comes next is far older than most people expect. Number 4, aged vinegar. Specifically Shaanxi aged vinegar, known as chen ku in Chinese, where chen means aged and ku means vinegar. The Shaanxi region of northern China has been producing this particular style of vinegar for over 3,000 years. And what makes it remarkable from a preservation standpoint is that vinegar essentially cannot spoil. The acetic acid concentration makes it a hostile environment for virtually all microorganisms. Shaanxi aged vinegar is not just stable, it actually improves over years of aging, developing a deep, complex flavor profile that younger vinegars lack. Chinese families treat a bottle of good Chen Ku as a serious pantry investment, using it sparingly in dressings, dipping sauces, and braises. The cultural weight of Shaanxi vinegar is significant enough that it holds a protected geographical indication status in China, meaning only vinegar produced in that region through traditional methods can carry the name. It is one of those rare foods where time is genuinely an ingredient rather than an enemy. What follows on this list is technically older in its cultural history and equally resistant to time. Number 5. Tofu roux. Tofu roux, which translates roughly as fermented tofu or preserved tofu curd. Do not confuse this with fresh tofu, which spoils quickly. Tofu roux is tofu that has been allowed to develop surface mold, then cured in a brine of salt, alcohol, and sometimes spices, like star anise or dried chilies for weeks to months. The result is a silky, intensely flavored cube of preserved curd that Chinese households have kept in sealed jars for extended periods without refrigeration concerns. There are red varieties, white varieties, and chili-seasoned varieties, each with its own regional signature. The red version, colored with red yeast rice, is particularly common in southern Chinese households. Grandmothers across Guangdong and Fujian provinces keep a jar of tofu roux almost constantly on hand, using it as a condiment, a cooking base, or simply spread over plain rice porridge on a cold morning. The depth of flavor that develops during its curing period makes it one of those pantry items that genuinely rewards patience. Just ahead, something even simpler in form, but equally impressive in its preservation credentials. Number 6. Gan mian, or dried noodles. The word gan means dry, and across China, dried noodle varieties range from thin rice vermicelli to thick wheat-based shapes, each region producing its own characteristic style. Unlike their fresh counterparts, which spoil within days, properly dried noodles stored in airtight conditions can remain fully usable for 1 to 2 years without any meaningful degradation. Chinese families, particularly in regions prone to flooding or harsh winters, have traditionally kept reserves of ganmian as a practical emergency food that requires nothing more than boiling water. There is genuine cultural diversity in dried noodle types across China. Shandong province favors thick, hand-pulled wheat noodles. Yunnan is famous for its thin rice noodles called mi xian when fresh but preserved effectively when dried. Fujian produces distinctive thin yellow noodles. A well-stocked Chinese pantry might hold several regional varieties simultaneously. And what comes next on this list is something with a stockpiling history that goes back far further than modern food packaging ever could. Number 7. Dried shrimp, called xia mi in Chinese, where xia means shrimp and mi literally means rice, a reference to the tiny grain-sized pieces that result from this preservation method. Salting and sun-drying shrimp is one of the oldest food preservation techniques in coastal Chinese communities, practiced along the Guangdong coast, in Fujian, and throughout the islands of Hainan. The combination of salt and moisture removal creates a product that can sit in a sealed jar for months to over a year without spoiling. Xia mi is used as a flavor booster rather than a main protein, stirred into soups, stir-fried with vegetables, folded into rice dumplings, or sprinkled over steamed dishes. The umami punch it delivers is disproportionate to its tiny size, which is part of its enduring pantry appeal. In traditional Cantonese cooking, a handful of good xia mi can transform an otherwise simple broth into something that tastes like hours of effort. Not far from this in the dried protein category, what we discuss next is perhaps even more universally stockpiled across Chinese households. Number 8. Dried tofu skin, called fu zhu in Chinese, where fu relates to tofu and zhu means bamboo because the dried sheets are rolled into shapes resembling bamboo sticks. Fu zhu is the thin film that forms on the surface of heated soy milk, carefully lifted and dried into flat sheets or folded rolls. When fully dried, fu zhu has an impressive shelf life of up to a year stored in a cool, dry environment away from moisture. It is high in protein, versatile across dozens of recipes from braised preparations to hot pot additions, and lightweight enough that it was historically easy to transport and store in bulk. Buddhist vegetarian cooking in China relies heavily on fu zhu as a meat substitute. and monasteries across the country have long maintained significant stocks of it. During times of food scarcity, the protein density of fuzhou made it an extraordinarily practical item to have in quantity. What we look at next also has deep roots in Chinese Buddhist food culture, but works through an entirely different preservation logic. Number 9, sesame paste, called jima jiang in Chinese, where zima means sesame and jiang means paste. Ground sesame paste is shelf-stable for a surprisingly long time because sesame seeds are naturally high in antioxidants, particularly sesamol and sesamin, which actively resist oxidation and rancidity. An unopened jar of good quality Chinese sesame paste can last well over a year at room temperature. This is distinctly different from Middle Eastern tahini in texture and flavor. Chinese jima jiang is darker, nuttier, and richer, made from fully roasted sesame seeds rather than raw ones. It serves as the base for cold noodle dressings across northern China, appears in hot pot dipping sauces in Beijing, and is used as a sweetened filling in traditional pastries. The richness and caloric density of sesame paste also made it historically valuable as a concentrated energy source during times when food was scarce or cooking was difficult. Next, we move to something that has been a cornerstone of Chinese cooking and Chinese pantry stockpiling for a staggering number of centuries. Number 10, soy sauce, called jiangyu in Chinese, where jiang means sauce and yu means oil. A properly brewed, high-quality Chinese soy sauce has a shelf life that can stretch for years in sealed bottles and well over a year after opening if stored away from heat and light. The combination of salt, fermentation byproducts, and low water activity creates a product that is deeply inhospitable to spoilage organisms. Chinese households routinely keep multiple soy sauce varieties simultaneously. There is the dark soy sauce, called lao chow, which is thicker and used for color in braised dishes. There is the light soy sauce, called sheng chow, which is thinner and saltier and used for seasoning. Premium aged varieties from regions like Guangdong are treated with the same reverence as fine vinegar or wine. And unlike many pantry staples, soy sauce is genuinely used daily in Chinese households rather than being reserved for emergencies, which means stockpiling it serves both practical and cultural purposes simultaneously. What we look at next has a less obvious preservation mechanism, but is equally dependable. Number 11, rock sugar, called bing tang in Chinese, where bing means ice or crystal and tang means sugar. These large translucent amber crystals are made from refined sucrose and are used differently from granulated sugar in Chinese cooking. Sugar in general does not truly expire when stored properly. It can harden or clump, but remains fully usable for an indefinite period as long as moisture is kept out. Bing tang specifically appears in hong shao ru, the famous red braised pork belly, in sweet soups called tang shui, in medicinal herbal preparations, and in a range of traditional candies. The clarity and large crystal structure of bing tang also made it historically associated with quality and prosperity, giving it a dual role as both a pantry staple and a culturally significant item in Chinese households. Old Chinese grocery stores would keep enormous jars of bing tang prominently displayed as a sign of abundance. What we discuss next also offers near indefinite shelf life, but then it comes from a completely different food category. Number 12, dried tangerine peel from the Xinhua region of Guangdong, which is distinct from the more commonly known chenpi, and is called Xinhui chenpi when aged. While this might seem like an item we are circling around, the specific Xinhui variety is treated as a separate premium product in Chinese culture, sometimes aged for 10, 20, or even 30 years in carefully maintained conditions. These aged peels develop medicinal compounds that increase in potency with time and are used in traditional Chinese medicine preparations, in slow-cooked soups, and in certain tea blends. The market for genuinely aged Xinhui citrus peel is serious enough that some pieces sell for prices comparable to precious metals by weight. This is not a casual pantry item, but a serious long-term storage investment for dedicated practitioners of Chinese traditional food culture. Coming up next is something simpler in appearance, but equally rich in stockpiling tradition. Number 13, miso-adjacent fermented soybean paste, called huangdu jiang in Chinese, where huang means yellow and dao means soybean. While miso is the Japanese version, Chinese yellow soybean paste has its own distinct character and is fundamental to northern Chinese cooking, particularly in Beijing style cuisine where it forms the base of the famous zhajiang noodle sauce. Like doubanjiang, this fermented paste benefits from salt and microbial activity to achieve long-term preservation, and sealed jars can remain usable for years. The complex umami depth that develops in properly fermented huangdoujiang cannot be replicated by fresh ingredients and only deepens over extended storage. And just ahead on the list is something that many people would never think of as a strategic stockpile item. Number 14. 5-spice powder, called wuxiang fen in Chinese, where wu means 5 and xiang means fragrant or spiced. This iconic blend typically contains star anise, cloves, Chinese cinnamon, Sichuan pepper, and fennel seeds, though the exact formula varies by region and family. Dried spice blends stored in airtight containers, away from light, maintain potency for well over a year, and remain usable, though less powerful, for considerably longer. Chinese families who prepare their own wuxiang fen from whole dried spices effectively have the building blocks of flavor preservation built into their pantry. The star anise component in particular is also known for its antimicrobial properties, adding another layer of preservation logic to keeping this blend on hand. What follows is something that operates on an entirely different timescale. Number 15. Dried tangerine seeds, used in traditional Chinese medicine and called ju he in Chinese, where ju means tangerine and he means seed or core. These are seeds dried from tangerines that have been consumed, then cleaned, sun-dried, and stored for medicinal use in treating conditions related to circulation and pain according to traditional Chinese medicine principles. The drying process renders them shelf-stable for extended periods. Number 16. Fermented shrimp paste called xiajiang, which is used extensively in southern Chinese and particularly Cantonese cooking as a concentrated flavoring agent that keeps for months to years due to its high salt content and fermentation. Number 17. Lotus root starch, called ou fen in Chinese, where you means lotus. This fine powder derived from lotus roots is used in traditional Chinese cooking to thicken sauces, make puddings, and brew warming drinks. Stored in sealed containers away from moisture, ou fen lasts for years and provides a nutritious carbohydrate source that Chinese households have maintained in reserves for generations. Number 18. Dried jujube vinegar, a regional specialty preserved condiment made from fermenting red dates in vinegar, which combines the near-infinite shelf life of vinegar with the nutritional properties of dried dates. Number 19. Black sesame paste called heiji mahu in Chinese, a sweetened thick paste made from roasted black sesame seeds with sugar or honey that is far more shelf-stable than most people assume due to the same antioxidant properties found in white sesame, with the added preservation benefit of its thick consistency that resists moisture absorption. Elderly Chinese families often keep this as both a daily food and an emergency caloric reserve. Number 20. Fermented rice, called juniang in Chinese, where ju means wine or alcohol, and niang means to brew or ferment. This sweet fermented glutinous rice is created by inoculating cooked sticky rice with a starter culture containing aspergillus mold and wild yeasts. The mild alcohol and organic acid content that develops through fermentation gives juniang a meaningful preservation advantage over plain cooked rice. Chinese households, particularly in Fujian and Jiangxi provinces, have kept juniang as a ready pantry ferment for centuries, using it in soups, desserts, and as a base for further fermentation into rice wine. The culture itself can be maintained and refreshed repeatedly from a small starter, meaning a single well-maintained batch can theoretically sustain itself indefinitely. What these 20 foods reveal is not simply a list of non-perishables, but a philosophy, a way of engaging with food that treats time as an ally rather than an enemy. Chinese pantry culture is one of the most sophisticated and quietly elegant survival systems ever developed, built not from panic, but from centuries of hard-earned wisdom about what truly lasts. The families who maintain these stockpiles are not preparing for disaster in the modern anxious sense. They are simply continuing a tradition that has fed generations through the worst that history could throw at them. That kind of wisdom deserves far more respect than it typically receives outside of the culture that built it.